Hello. Today, I really want to have you pay close attention because we have a guest that has a similar background like me, but I believe he probably had an even harder journey, a more challenging journey to get to where he is. It's Franco Perez is his name. And what he found out is that in particularly expensive areas, like for example, the San Francisco Bay areas, there are still to this day a lot of mobile home parks, and most of the mobile homes, if you really look at it, are relatively old and old-fashioned. So he thought, I want to do something about it. I want to find a way to allow people in high-priced areas to live a better life and maybe even have ownership of a facility. And so he came up with a way to create modern, nice, really great mobile homes, kind of custom-made almost, but way less expensive than what is typical in these really high price areas. So he's going to tell us how can people make money out of it, how can people join him, but also how can actually a business like that be a source for cash flow. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we're talking about the path to early retirement and what kind of different types of investments and money movements and stuff like that we can do. And as you know, in season 2, we have this umbrella term of cash flow, and always want to have interesting guests that have something that helps us to either have more cash flow or better cash flow or higher cash flow. And so today I'm really glad that we have Franco with us, because I had thought I knew something about what he is doing and how to use it and so forth. And then I looked at the website and found out, maybe not so much. So Franco, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Axel. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're more than welcome. And we love to have interesting guests that are innovative and want to do something, even though it may be a revival in a sense. Right. So before we go into exactly what you're doing, tell us a little bit, how did you actually get into the business that you're in? And, did you just sometime have like this epiphany that some people talk about? They're sitting at the beach and thinking about the world, and then they realize, mobile homes is what I need to do.
Oh man, no. Actually, there's a lot that kind of happened. But, me personally, I came from the Philippines at a young age, had immigrant parents that moved out here. There was a rough situation that happened. My dad was the only breadwinner for the family. They divorced. He fled the country and left me, my mom, and my younger sister all to our own to survive, right? And we were here in the Silicon Valley, where it's very expensive. It was very tough. I had to drop out of school just to kind of pay that rent bill every single month. And I remember me and my mom just gathering money together. We would borrow money from friends too, just at the end of the month, just to pay that bill to survive, right? And it's crazy because there's a lot of places like the Silicon Valley where you have a lot of median income people, but very heavy housing payments to be able to live there, right? So I remember the times where my sister was getting kicked out of school because we didn't have a proper address, and going through all that struggle and that pain, just trying to get out of the rat race, right? And what's unfortunate is during that time, when you're in your bubble or group of friends, what's interesting is we're not taught a lot of these things that the wealthy are taught. There's a lot of important values that I wish I knew sooner. And there's tools to help get people out of that rat race. And real estate is a big one. Long story short, found myself doing marketing for a real estate company. I asked for a raise. They couldn't give me a raise. They're like, I'll teach you how to sell. Became a great real estate agent. And once I was like at a very secure point, I had this epiphany. I think once you're comfortable financially, then you start to have this philanthropic, how do I say this? I had this passion I had this realization that in the real estate agent industry, the agents are really focused and trained to find the wealthiest people you can meet and help them find the most expensive assets that they can. And that's kind of where a lot of the industry goes to, which is cool for people, but it really wasn't fulfilling for me. I wanted to find my life. I wanted to put my life into somewhere where I would help the people that were in my shoes when I was going through that pain, because I know how hard it was. And I want to educate more people how to get out of that rat race. And I want to create stepping stones for people to get out of that rat race. Right. And explored a ton of different real estate options. The problem is in like areas like San Diego or San Jose or anywhere in the Bay Area, you're either renting at $3,500 a month or you're buying something at $1.6 million. And how do you even imagine? The problem is the regular working class, the teachers, the nurses, they don't really make enough to be able to pay the rent, save enough for a down payment, and then even dream about ever one day purchasing a single family home. So came across mobile homes and realized that, hey, there's a ton of mobile home parks everywhere. And these mobile homes are built very old school. They have a lot of bad myths around them. The media in Hollywood makes it a bad stigma, and it's misunderstood because that's all we see. We have no reason to go into a mobile home park. However, financially, in very metro areas, there's a lot of myths that are false. Like they actually have been appreciating over the years. You can gain value. There are financing options, and it's a perfect stepping stone to get someone out of renting into getting some of those home ownership values. In that step, they'll be able to still work on their career and then boost themselves out of that into home ownership later down the line.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. And we want to dive a little deeper into that. Before we do that, I think it's a unique opportunity because I don't very often have somebody like you who has this kind of really struggling immigration story. I mean, I'm an immigrant in a sense, and we had many immigrants on the show, but oftentimes it's like in my case, people know this. I came over with the military, and the military typically takes care of their own. And even when I was done with my military career, I was established enough so that I would qualify for a really well-paying job. And I had somewhat of a choice where to be. And most of the other people who have a similar background, they came with their parents and then had the opportunity to go to school, find a regular job, realize that that's maybe not the thing they really wanted, and then did the thing that they did. What I'm curious about, in your case, you describe beautifully the struggle. Is the bubble that you were talking about so tight that there is no thought about, okay, we are hardworking, we are, tight when it comes to the family unit? Why would you and your mom and your sister have decided to stay rather than go somewhere where it's probably cheaper to live and where, kind of like the effort you put in allows you a better life? I've always been curious. So if you don't mind, Can you say something about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I asked the same thing too. But there's two sides to that. One is in a lot of the expensive areas, that's where the job opportunities are. That's one big thing. Good weather, good schools, that sort of thing as well, right? So that's one big element of it as well. And then I always look at everything at a macro level too, or from a zoomed out perspective. Let's say it is New York. Let's say it is the Bay Area. We should have this American dream. There should be equal opportunity for the poor people and the rich people to live in the same areas and have the same equal opportunities. And now the freedom really is a financial freedom that people should be really chasing for. But to what you said is, for me, I think it was the job opportunities. I didn't want to go. Our family didn't want to be in an area that's a good question. I should really look into figuring out why people stay in this area and that sort of thing too. But usually, whether it's family member ties, whether it's a job that's locally here, or if they want to live here because it's good food, good culture, or similar people that are similar to them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is a very important component. And I mean, the answer that I found oftentimes when we talk about a similar thing, not from an immigration perspective, but from a perspective of why are areas across the country, purely from the financial perspective, so different. And why I'm saying this is our overall strategy at Ideal Wealth Grower is to afford and allow people and help people who live in areas like the San Francisco Bay Area or LA or New York or Miami or pick any of the really affluent and expensive areas to say, well, I might, for whatever reason, want to stay in that area. I might have this good job that pays me well, but I also know even if I can afford to live where I am, it's pretty much unimaginable to have a $1.6 million investment property. So our strategy is to say, okay, you can choose and you should choose where you want to live for whatever reasons that you have for yourself and your family. But there are areas in the world, in the country, in the US, like for example in the Midwest, where we then help people to invest with turnkey providers, where they can still to this day. We just have one of our, we call them tribe members, buy a duplex for about $180,000 with 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath, those two sides. And that place together will make $2,000 rent. And if you think about it, you basically renting a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, half of a house, $1,000 is not really unreasonable. And it's fully renovated, beautiful, all brand new. But then they are also not making $120,000. They're making maybe $60,000. But that ratio between what income is and what they pay for rent is, for lack of a better term, much healthier. And when people ask me, well, why is that possible in some places and in other places? Not, like I said, from the immigrant perspective, but people have ties. They have ties to their college where they went to and got their degrees. They have ties to the family. They have ties to the cultural values to live in a more conservative or in a more liberal environment. They have ties to their community, even if they're not immigrants themselves. But if you are in certain places in Pennsylvania or stuff like that, and you like to have some German influence, like, you know, where I'm coming from, or you want to be somewhere on the West Coast where you have Filipino or Chinese or Japanese influence, there are these groupings. I found out that somewhere in Minnesota, there is like a Somali community, right? And it's kind of like an extended family kind of thing. So I was just curious. And everybody has a little bit of a different story. Now, you already hinted that what you now do, what has evolved basically through your real estate. And I think for those people who don't know real estate agency or agents, there's a kind of an unfair thing in my view as well. And I don't mean this unfair to you as somebody who went through or has been working through this. But I believe strongly that the effort that it takes to sell an average house, not the top of the line, but an average house in the Bay Area, and selling an average house, let's say somewhere in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is not really that different. But the big difference is the house in Albuquerque, New Mexico costs $250,000, and most agents get paid a commission in percentage of the sales price. And like you said already, that relatively average house in the Bay Area is 1.5 or 1.6 million. And so if you make 3%, right, or 2%, then that's hundreds of thousands potentially, or tens of thousands of dollars. And the guy in Albuquerque is lucky if he makes 10,000 on a sale, right? So same skill potentially, but again, the location makes a huge difference. I'm glad that you were there because obviously that triggered for you to do what you do now. So let's transition. You mentioned mobile homes. Can you try to describe a little bit also what you show on your website about what kind of mobile homes and what makes you guys' approach different?
Yeah. And to what I want to add a little bit to what you said earlier is because the truth of it is, you know, and it's nothing to blame agents or any of that. It's just like, the truth of it is that it is easier to make 3 times more on a more expensive home. And that's the truth. And that's part of why we built our business. It is more difficult to help people that are barely able to financially make it to afford these homes. Now, what we focus on is really building our systems to really create that opportunity and open that door wider for people, right? And if there's nobody helping these guys, then, you know, unfortunately, agents are going to gear towards trying to help those that easily qualify for it.
I was actually thinking you were to say, Franco, if nobody else is doing it, then we do it.
Or that too. I mean, you know, for me, I love if more people could find solutions like this. For me, like there's a point though where, you know, I could be making more on commissions and that sort of thing on single family homes. And that's the truth. But for me, it's so much more fulfilling when you go to these families and you see, I've sold rental and investment properties to wealthy people and they'll be like, oh, okay, great. You know, but when you see a family that's never been able to own something, when you get them a nice home that they get to call their own, oh man, there's tears of joy every single time. It still gives me goosebumps right now thinking about it, about how grateful they are, how thankful they are, and how they never thought it would be possible that they'd have something like this.
We should pause here real quick and really make a strong point about that when anybody in any kind of business, this is at least my experience, I'm estimating probably twice as old as you are. So in my slightly longer experience, everything has numbers and calculations and some logic and those kind of things. Kind of like the more cold math side of things. And then there is the emotional side of things. And I would totally agree with you. I see this oftentimes with our investors who say, okay, we want to sign up and we want your help and so forth. And they sign up initially for the 6-month program, because not quite sure if they really want to go for a lifetime support. And they ask me, what can we expect to get within the 6 months? And I always say, well, my goal is that you at least once in these 6 months go through the experience to really become an investor owner. You own a property that provides shelter to other people. And it's similar to, at least it felt to me when you were describing similar, their reaction. Yes, we go through all the analysis and the numbers and does a cash flow and what's the interest rate and the more blah, all that scientific mathematical. And when the closing is over, then comes the emotional reaction. And that is so much stronger and so much more fulfilling, where you have to say, well, that's why I really do it. Right? Sometimes people say, Axel, you should charge more. And it's more because if it were free, then people wouldn't value it. It needs to be a slight little pain. But the main point is that emotional reaction that people have when they get their property, whether it's for their own occupancy like you do, or if it is for an investment. Because a lot of people, like you said, they hear about it and they get told in the media that only rich people can do it, or you have to already be rich to ever be an investor. And when people like you and I actually help them and they realize, yeah, I can be one of those people too. It is doable, right? That emotional component is like super strong.
Absolutely. And it's an energy too. I mean, there's people that want to help other people. That's why I love the middle class and that sort of thing. There's so many people that volunteer and really care about people. And I think that I have that in me is like, honestly, even if I didn't make anything out of all of this, and which we didn't in the beginning, is knowing that I'm able to help one family be able to build a foundation for their future. That is so fulfilling to me that as soon as that happened, I was addicted and I want to help more families build that first stepping stone and first foundation of wealth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has a lot to do with remembering how certain things felt. Now, I don't want to give any kind of false pretense that I was really anywhere close to the struggles that you and your family went through. But there are situations when I first came over in the late 90s to the United States. And for the first time, I went with friends into a Walmart, even though Germany is not a poor country or anything. And yes, we have supermarkets. But a Walmart was just shocking, right? Like just the sheer size of a place under one roof, having all of this kind of stuff. And those are kind of like experiences you remember. And I think when somebody had the opportunity to have those kind of experiences, you can relate to other people when they actually have those kind of experiences. If you never had it, it's very hard to relate, right? So I think that's also why it's more impactful. We don't want to just talk about that, even though I think it's important and maybe interesting for the audience. So tell us a little bit, what kind of typical units are you building? How big are they? How much do they cost? The aspect that you put on your website about the quality. Tell us a little bit about the product.
Yeah. So basically, I can describe, I'm wondering, actually, I'll just explain it through audio. But basically, a lot of mobile homes were built in the 70s. They're about 700 square feet, single wides, 1 or 2 bedroom. However, these are built in key areas like San Diego, like LA, like San Jose, really for temporary housing for the workforce, farmers, temporary working people. But it was designed before it was a high density housing. But with a lot of these lots, there's a lot of land that can be optimized. So we'll find a lot of these, we'll work with park owners or mobile home owners to help optimize their land. It's kind of like you have a plot of land that's big enough to hold a 1,500 square foot home. However, your home's only 700 square feet. Hey, if you double your square footage, the value of your home would be nicer. Plus, we can get a loan towards that, and we can raise the value more than what we would spend on the construction to build this home to be double the size. There's a ton of benefits to it. And
before you go on, can I just ask real quick, would you say the majority of the homes that you guys create go on parks and then the owners rent them, or do you sell them basically to people and then they rent the land to have it in the park?
Yeah, so most of our business are mobile homes that are in park or that are any mobile home park where you pay a space rent. Variables to that are different in every different location, but for context.
Sorry, what I meant is, as far as I know, there are two options, right? Like the park owner, the owner of the land basically can say, okay, I have an empty space and it's a 35-year-old unit that is being hauled away. Now we want to put a new one. Franco, can you give us a new one that they want to then rent? Or what I also know is they just rent the land, and anybody who has or will buy a home from you can put it on that empty lot. What's the majority of what you guys do?
It's the second to what you said. It's the later one, which is most park owners won't be owning the home itself to rent out.
Okay. So people actually own the house and the park owner owns the land and rents it to that house owner.
Exactly. So they only collect the rent on the land section, kind of like a high HOA payment.
Right.
And then the owner, the home above is owned by a resident-owned, user, which is good for government use too, because they consider this affordable housing because it allows for people to be able to own these. What's great about this is that you can't purchase this to rent it out, which causes the price to stay stabilized. So anyone that's purchasing in has to be an actual person that has that as their primary residence. You're not competing with investors in that way.
So, and then basically the customer, for lack of a better term, would basically pay, if it's a loan on the house that you built for them, they pay on that loan as one payment, then they pay for the rent of the lot, so to speak, as the second payment, and then the third would be the utilities, I assume, right?
Exactly. So for context-wise, let's use San Jose as an example. Average rent for like a 2-bedroom apartment in this specific area I'm talking about is about $3,500. Now, there's a specific client that I'm thinking of. Her name's Hazel. She works in the medical field, whatnot. She purchased our first mobile home that we built, and that one was about 1,450 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, and her payments, instead of her choosing to pay that rent of $3,500, she pays, I have the numbers here. The space rent was $1,000 a month. Her mortgage is $1,900 a month, and her down payment was $30,000. The mobile home itself was $300,000. So her total payment with the space rent of $1,000 and $1,800 mortgage, that's $2,800. Let's call it $3,000 a month. But with that, she's paying less than what she would for an apartment. Plus, she's getting benefits of owning something, and 2/3 of her payment is going towards the mortgage versus a whole amount going towards the landlord's rent, right?
Well, and she has twice the space. That's maybe not that unimportant either.
Exactly. Twice the space, and surprisingly a beautiful brand new home. And then on the other hand, she's able to really save up as well. I'm sorry. So on the other hand, she was originally trying to purchase a single family home. And if she were to try to at that time, it would have been $1.5 million. Typical down payment would be $140,000. And her mortgage and taxes would be about $8,400, right? So
and that's actually, I have to interject a little bit. For those who don't do mental math that quick, that's only a 1% down payment that you just assumed, even less, right? So that's very rare. When you have 1.5 million, 1% would be 150,000. So even a first-time home buyer with all kind of government support,
10%.
Yeah, well, I've seen down, the lowest I've seen is 3. But if you go 3%, that's more than 100,000, right? So 10% is 150,000, right? So
that down payment is half of what the mobile home value is. I mean, the mobile home purchase.
Right. Yeah, and let's focus a little bit more on that, because some people in the audience might say, okay, Franco just said that the mobile home was about 300, and I don't know how many people really have an appreciation exactly what goes into it and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about what of homes you build?
Let me finish on that example of Hazel, because she bought that 2.5 years ago, and she bought it for $300,000. Now, if she were to resell her home, it would be worth about $370,000, which is appreciated by a lot in only 2.5 years, right?
And why is that? Can you describe where that appreciation comes from?
The appreciation comes from really the surrounding area about, what are the alternative options for people that are working in this area? So it really follows the real estate market. When home prices appreciate, and then when home rents appreciate as well, guess what? This becomes a more viable option, and people are starting to really understand how this works. However, it's kind of similar to like this $1.5 million home that we're talking about. If we were to go to Kansas, that would be like $150,000. But the location that it's in, the mobile home park that it's in, because it's walkable to Samsung, to Google, that sort of thing, people would pay a certain value for that location to be able to live there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Maybe another way to put it is if you think about, okay, you said earlier the apartment, 700 square foot apartment costs maybe 3,500. While 2 years ago, if that was 3,500, it's probably 4,000 now, right? So it's 20% more as well for inflation and other reasons. So the same people in the same area looking at what are the alternatives would also be willing to pay more, I suspect. Now that begs the question, one of those myths that I didn't know about, but it sounds like if I were to be in the area, I were a customer of yours, I would be Hazel, or my daughter is Hazel, let's say, and buys that. That means it's kind of implies, and tell me if I'm right about this, that you could actually sell it, right?
Exactly. And there's a good resale value. There's a good demand for these in areas like this. Are you in San Diego, Axel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually in San Diego as well, we're building a few homes out there also in projects there too. But more and more recently are people finding out about how mobile homes work online, and you can actually look into how these communities look with millennials and younger. They don't have that false stigmas that feel like these are trailer trash for drug dealers or criminals and that sort of thing. But if you actually take the time to look into these parks, you'll see that they're very safe communities. And the people that live here are high, we have a lot of people that are high income or people that have come from owning single family and just want to retire, and because they have alternative investments like with you, like having a lower payment on their housing would allow for them to enable to purchase multiple out-of-state rentals as well.
You're totally right about that. Yeah, totally. One thing I think for people who are intrigued to hear about this, can you describe a little bit the differences between the mobile homes that you build, manufactured housing, and ADUs?
Yeah. So I guess when people think of mobile homes, they think like trailers, trailer parks, that sort of thing, which there are some like in outer metro areas. But these mobile homes are really homes that are built in a factory. They're considered mobile because they're built on steel I-beams that allow for the building to be transported on wheels on the freeway into these parks and that sort of thing. But most of our homes are double wide, so they're two large units that are built with a very high quality standard. With the new construction standards that you'll see in any new builds, actually the standards are higher because they have to be built strong enough to be able to be transported. But that being said, factory-built housing and manufactured housing and mobile homes have all become a big trend lately because construction is a very big issue that's coming in the future. So when you look at how much attention is being brought to this space, it's now being used for ADUs. It's now being used for modular developments. It's also being used for multifamily apartment buildings with multiple floors. So it's the same construction factories that we build all of these items. It's just we're using these in mobile home parks. But the same factory is also building multi-floor units, and governments are now allowing this. It's starting to open up to where they need this to create affordable housing in their cities.
Yeah, I understand. And thanks for explaining that. I mean, part of the reason I wanted to ask that question, since we have you on the show, is in Europe, there's also something called manufactured housing. But the biggest difference that I'm aware of is they build it in a factory, just like you said, but they build basically the components of a house. So they build the walls with the windows and the doors in it, and the electricity is already in it and stuff like that. And oftentimes these are even like pretty solid materials, but they don't build something where you can say a 1,400 square foot unit, and when it's in place, it's going to be two trailers that are basically pulled by a large truck. They basically come with a huge truck, but where the walls and the roof and the appliances and some of the things, they're all in pieces, almost like if you imagine more like a puzzle. And then you have a concrete foundation with all the regular, water and gas and whatever other pipes sticking out. And then in typically 3 days, they put all the puzzle pieces that they had originally built in the factory together and you have the house. But when it's there, when it's ultimately put on that foundation, it's basically permanent. You can't just come back. Like I would imagine if for some reason somebody were to close down their park and somebody is a tenant, so to speak, with their personally owned unit that they bought from you, Franco, and the park closes, they can ask the truck company to come again and move it to another park, right? And with these European manufactured houses, yes, they're manufactured in a similar way, but you can never really move them again. So that's the difference. Now on ADUs or what's called auxiliary dwelling units, which I know is a big thing, especially in California. Are there any size limits on, could we use one of your like maybe smaller 1,000 square foot units as an ADU?
It's really interesting you're saying that because, and not to talk about our podcast too on your podcast, but we have a podcast where we actually specifically talk about manufactured housing and how it's the future of construction. It's not around our mobile home stuff, but it's really around innovative construction where they do build very big, large developments. They build winery buildings, they build low-income housing buildings that really can house like 80-unit apartment buildings at the same time. And just like how you said, and what's interesting is I did interview someone that's from Europe where it's so much more popular to have manufactured housing because they have less regulation. They're able to really advance their construction way faster.
It's kind of curious sometimes how, I guess, the universe plays a little bit with us. My wife and I, we were looking to the United States, and we have obviously still family in Germany. And so we looked at a map where somebody kind of moved Europe over around the globe as if it were like a ball to superimpose it over North America to see where would that actually be. We found out, for example, that Florida is kind of, if you look at it from a European perspective, is about the same place like Egypt, right? But it also means like places in Sweden, Norway, Denmark and stuff like that, way north in Canada. And most people don't realize that. But the reason I also brought it up with the European perspective is that because of how much further north most of Europe is, that period of time in the year where you can reasonably actually build a traditional house is typically quite a bit shorter. Right. So it's super appealing to say, okay, we build all the pieces in a factory all year round where we don't have to worry about weather. And then we put it on a trailer as soon as the sun comes out. And in 5 days, the whole thing is there, which you couldn't traditionally never do. Even if you have a great framing crew and all that kind of stuff, it takes several months, right? Well, if you only had 4 months in the summer or so that you can actually build and the rest of the year is kind of rainy and cold, then this makes a huge difference, obviously. Go ahead.
To add to that real quick is that everything that we own, the laptop, the iPad, the iPhone, the cars are all built in factory on an assembly line, right? In a very fast fashion. And that's how we keep things affordable and sellable. The only thing that's been behind in America is the construction element. We transport labor on site. We have so much waste, that sort of thing. However, now we're starting to realize that it can be built in factories and you can hire people to work long-term and with safer jobs because they have all their tools there, they have all the protection there and all the inspectors there as well, that we can build so much faster without worrying about the weather in the year and being able to build more efficient and cheaper housing, right? And I do want to touch on one thing too about the concern, because there's another myth that you talked about how in mobile home parks, that if the park decides to redevelop or that sort of thing or sell, there's a lot of government control. It's kind of like a eminent domain where if the city needs your location, they're not just going to take that house from you without giving you any value back. They are required to pay you what the market value is and plus more if there's costs to be able to relocate you, which does happen here and there. It's pretty difficult to close and redevelop a park, but I have seen cases where they have, and they've actually ended up with more than what their home would have sold for if it were to be sold, right? So that's one thing that I think is a myth that's very misunderstood as well. Because these banks, these also wouldn't put money putting in there if there's a possibility for a redevelopment and just losing your home, right?
Right, understood. Yeah, that's great that you clarified that. Now, one of the other myths that I wanted to touch on real quick, and maybe it is or maybe it isn't. I heard this actually on Bigger Pockets because Brendan, what's his last name? the guy on Bigger Pockets with the beard. He basically was a few years ago in the process of buying a mobile home park. And one of the things that he mentioned was that there supposedly is some law or something out there that kind of forbids the development of new mobile home parks. Is that true or not true? Or what can you say?
Forbids the development of new mobile home parks. Is that what you said?
Basically to say, okay, I want to buy a piece of land and then go to the zoning commission and say, okay, I want this to be a mobile home park. Yes. You have campgrounds, you can have residential zoning or combined zone, all the different zonings. But supposedly at some point in the past, the government said, no, zoning for no mobile home parks is no longer out there. I never checked. So I wanted to ask you if that's true.
Yeah. So there are many areas, like in California, it's very difficult to build out a new mobile home park. It's not, I'm part of the government lobbying. I'm very involved with that too. And there's a lot of, just like how we talk about, there's a lot of false stigmas and people don't want to have a quote mobile home park in their cities because of those false stigmas. Now, I have a really good friend that's building a park out in Montana. Also, I have a friend that's building a park in Texas and North Carolina. These, there are counties and cities that are against building new parks, but there are some cities that are more innovative or more open-minded than others, that really anyone that's building more housing to bring people into their city will take action on that. The truth is, it's, as an investor standpoint, it's not always the best thing to build. If you can build townhouses and sell them, that's always going to be more profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? I mean, my dream, and I'm probably too old to ever realize it, maybe if I have somebody like you young enough to balance that out. But my dream has always been to take the fundamental understanding of what you described to be manufactured housing in a factory, whether it's tiny houses, but I much rather like to have what you're doing, like modern, high quality, well-equipped and durable mobile homes in something that I would call an eco-village, where all the mobile home parks all across the country that I've ever seen is basically sardines in a can. Right? Like absolutely ultra maximizing so that if you reach out the window, you can basically touch the next trailer next to you. And my understanding of one of those eco villages would be more like if you were to convert a large campground, where each house has a little bit of a lot, a little bit of space around it, which also then from an ecological perspective allows for people to be off grid, to be sustainable, to grow some stuff. All those kind of things that you can't do in a mobile home park in the traditional sense, because you literally have typically asphalt, the utility connections, and then one sardine next to the next one. And even the little bigger ones, when you put a double wide on it, then you again almost reaching the next one next to it. So I don't know if there's an opportunity for that, because you're right. If somebody puts like townhouses, the developer's perspective and money making is not obviously way more efficient. But from a quality of life, which is always important to me, and from an environmental perspective, I think it would be much nicer to build these eco villages that people actually want to live in and that are self-sustaining and potentially off-grid. So I don't know if that's possible, but maybe that's a compromise between like purely a mobile home park or purely residential development.
It is possible. And what we're starting to find out lately is there's a lot of big job migrations in factories, like Tesla factories, for example, that are building these really fast factories that don't have neighboring homes next to it. And I'm actually working that I can't talk too much about with some park owners that are looking to develop quick parks where we can quickly build units into those parks. And we're consulting for them to kind of build those out quickly. And people are it's coming. You'll see it more often. And totally, like, I'd love to partner with you on something like that if it ever comes about. But it's definitely the best way to build out new housing in factories.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close, I think it's important for our audience members to hear you say a little bit the range of like the smallest to the largest, the lowest price to the highest price that you guys are offering, and maybe a word or two about what the financing options are.
Yes. So keep in mind, like, these costs that I'm going to say is really just based out the Bay Area, but there are cheaper areas that are outside where the ratios are a lot smaller. People, I'm sure there's people from like Texas that are like $300K for a mobile home. There's no way, right? So, but it's different in every area. But in San Jose, we work with people that need to be really entry level, and we'll still help them with the old mobile homes as far as purchasing those. And those low end are typically can be like about $80,000 for a single wide, or about like $160,000 for a double wide, like an old 1970s home. Now, average price for a mobile home itself, a brand new ones that we build in this area of San Jose, is about like $370,000. There are higher end areas that we've helped with. For example, like there's Malibu project that we were a part of. That one sold for $1.1 million, right? Where, there's areas like that where that's kind of way less than the average home in there. San Diego, I would say average new homes are about like $330,000. But to get to the financing, you'll typically find about a 10% down.
Okay.
And your average lease rent is about $1,000. Your average mortgage is about $2,000 to $2,400. But you definitely realize and look at every decision for anyone always has to be customized, right? If you're coming from renting and paying $3,500, then this is the right choice for you, right? If you have the option to buy single family, then go for it. But, if you can't, and this might be a good stepping stone to get you there, then you should definitely consider it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I would actually be a little more extreme than you are on that. And I said this in multiple shows and written about it. In very high-priced areas, pretty much most of California, at least as long as it's within like 50 miles or so of the beach, I would recommend for people to go with something like you were just describing, what you're actually doing, what you're helping people to do, not only because it gets you in, but also because you can then say, okay, if I have one of those better jobs, and before we started recording, I was kind of joking around, in San Francisco, in the city, if you make less than $103,000, you're eligible for rent support by the government, right? So I use that example with somebody who makes maybe around that number, maybe like $9,000, $10,000 a month. Now, if you're somewhere in the Midwest, you would say, well, that's crazy, who's making that kind of money? But if everything else costs 2 and 3 times more, not just housing, but everything else, then you also need to make that kind of money even to just get by. Now, if somebody has those costs that you just mentioned, $3,500, and let's say they spend another $3,500 for living. So they have $7,000, but they make $9,000. They now have $2,000 every month that they can actually accumulate and make investments in more affordable areas and supplement and ultimately generate passive income if they were to go for this. And this is why I'm saying I'm more extreme. In those high-cost areas in California or in New York or in Massachusetts or stuff, I would say go for that stuff that Franco offers so you can ultimately become an investor. Because if you really go for that single-family home in that high-price area, you will never become an investor. Even if you could afford it, don't do it.
I have so many people my age that really are chasing that dream of home ownership. And one step that I got to say, because there's so many people that do this and make this mistake, is they chase that dream of home ownership and they get that one home in an expensive area like you're talking about, and then they become house poor. They didn't realize or calculate that this is going to be $8,000 a month, and I have to keep working and maybe even get a second job to pay off the house that I'm living in that isn't really giving me a big cash flow. It happens all the time, and people really need guidance from you, from us, to really map out what is their actual goal. Is it just to own a home, or is it to be financially free to be able to do whatever you'd like to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. And I mean, I would actually encourage you, if you run across any of those friends or people that you come by that chase that,
they come to me after they made the mistake.
Yeah, well, but the point, what I'm trying to say is, you can send them to me, but the point, what I'm getting at is, there's only a tiny little bit of change necessary in mindset to get. Absolutely. And that tiny little bit of change is home ownership is basically owning housing, right? I own housing. And the tiny little adjustment, especially for people in affluent areas, in my opinion, is to say, nobody says that when you own housing that you have to move in there.
Yeah.
So as soon as you make that tiny adjustment to say, I want to chase home ownership to own housing, but it doesn't have to be for me. It could be owning housing that I make available to others. That's still
Absolutely.
every investor that works with us owns one or more houses to provide for other people. And oftentimes they also own one for themselves. But the idea of home ownership is not limited to you only a homeowner if you move in yourself. So that tiny little difference, I think, is really important for people to realize. So before we close, Franco, I want to ask you the two questions that I ask everybody at the end of our show that don't have anything to do with manufactured houses or real estate or anything like that. Is if you could meet anybody you wanted to, who would it be and why?
Oh boy, alive or dead, or
yeah, past or present?
For me, I feel like it would be Steve Jobs. I feel like he's a very good innovator and thinks of things very differently and how he leads too. I'm a big proponent of how he's built what he's built. So I would say Steve Jobs for that.
Okay, very cool. And then the other question is, if you had a time machine, you could go forward and backward anywhere you want. You're not allowed to change the so-called time-space continuum, but you can go anywhere. Where would you go and why?
A time machine, man. I could say a lot of things. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm a very grateful person. And like how you said, how the universe connects us too, right? What's interesting is the struggles I've been through as far as my dad leaving. I could say like, I wish I had that life of like having both parents and that sort of thing. But the truth of it is that part of my life was one of the hardest parts of my life. But going through that struggle is really what made me passionate and made me hardworking and driven to who I am today. And I feel like I wouldn't change anything, I feel like. But unless it was like, I wish I could have done this or built this sooner. But if I did it sooner, I don't feel like I would be as driven as I am today.
Yeah.
I wouldn't change anything, honestly.
Okay, well, that's fine. Nobody says you have to jump in. Even you might own one, you don't have to use it, right? It's one of those things you can put in the garage and say, hey, if my mind ever changes. So that's very cool. Yeah. It was really fun to talk to you. I think it's an important component. I mean, I always say myself and our investors help other people to have nice housing in residential real estate. You're actually one step ahead of that by actually building and supporting people to build these units. So I'm grateful for what you do. If people say, okay, I'm in that situation, I'm somewhere in California, or I'm somewhere where it's really pretty much unaffordable to ever really have my own place unless I find somebody like Franco, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, all our stuff is on www.franco.tv. Our company is called Franco Mobile Homes. But yeah, you'll find us on YouTube, Instagram, that sort of thing. So,
okay,
and we're always easy to reach and answer any questions around this at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very cool. We put obviously all of that in the show notes, and we're also going to probably get the link to your podcast so people can just jump after they listen to this one. They can then go and listen to yours. So Franco, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a lot of fun, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me, and thanks for what you do too.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.